This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 75 of Here's How for the 10th of July 2018. Ireland has a lot of minor parties, some with more realistic policies than others. In this podcast, I'll talk to the leader of one of them and ask how realistic are the policies he hopes will lead his party back into Dáil Éireann.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Coming up in a few minutes.
We're talking about hardened criminals
No,
here.
but you're saying that people should be sent to jail where the Gardaí suspect that they're going to commit a crime. You don't think that some senior Gardaí would have very conveniently suspected that Maurice McCabe was going to commit a crime?
I think they're totally different things. I think Maurice McCabe...
No, but they're not totally different things. You have a police force in Ireland that has been entirely unaccountable and that has too much power centralised in one organisation, and that power has been grossly abused. You're proposing to give them more power.
Well, you look at it, for example, if anyone's good, the Gardaí don't sentence criminals. That's up to
But
the
you're
judge.
proposing that they should be able to.
No, in terms...
It's on your website.
That's coming up shortly, but first, a couple of other things. Number one, I'm trying to expand the podcast, put more time into getting interesting guests, researching topics and so on. So to justify the time that I want to spend on that, I've launched a Patreon page where you can support the podcast if you think that's worthwhile. So I'd really appreciate it if you could go to the website and follow the links to do that. And big thanks to Brian Green from Dublin, who signed up as a patron since the last podcast. Secondly, I'm on holidays at the moment, so you might hear some background noise. That's because I'm recording this on a little recorder in the park. Anyway, I like free stuff. I think everyone does, even when it's not really free. While on holiday, I was in a hotel where they did breakfast as one of those buffet things where you can collect whatever from a huge array of food. There was pancakes, every type of cereal, cooked breakfasts, scrambled eggs, different breads, hot croissants and pastries, cake for breakfast, and cheese boards and whatever else. I ate myself stupid. Some people have the presence of mind to just collect a couple of things that they want. I don't have that sort of self-control. And the worst of it was that I wasn't even able to eat half the things that I collected, even by stuffing myself. So I had to either eat myself even sicker or watch the food go to waste. And the food wasn't even all that good. It looked appealing, but the pancakes were stodgy, the scrambled eggs were cold, and it was clear that I wasn't the only glutton there. There was a huge amount of food being wasted in the place. Now, I wouldn't mind so much, but I'm normally pretty good with avoiding that type of waste. I'm the sort of person who goes to the supermarket with a shopping list. I buy what I need, I freeze leftovers. We really don't do food waste in our house. So what comes over me at the breakfast buffet? Economists actually have an explanation for this. They have a saying, unpriced resources will be wasted. That basically means that if you're not paying for it, you're not that careful with it. We saw this in spectacular fashion a few years ago with the plastic bag levy. When it was introduced, plastic bag consumption in Ireland dropped immediately by 93%. I thought about this and the Right to Water campaign when I was listening to all the problems with water supply during the hot, dry weather. In case you don't remember, the Right to Water campaign are against all water charges and against metering. Their website says water charges will discriminate against working people and the unemployed in favour of the wealthy and are another regressive tax taking vital money out of the pockets of people and out of our economy. Our public water system is already paid for through general taxation, which is progressive, and we wish it to remain that way. As I said, I like free stuff as much as the next person, and I don't want an extra bill to pay any more than the next person either. But that whole campaign was totally wrong. It was based on the premise that paying a water bill was double taxation. That was nonsense to begin with. There's far more than one type of tax anyway. We pay income tax, VAT, motor tax, inheritance tax, excise duty, stamp duty, property tax. That's just some of the taxes paid by private individuals, to say nothing of the taxes that are paid by businesses and passed on through pricing to the customers. And much as we might not like paying them, it's right that there are lots of different types of taxes. If there weren't, if all of our taxes were just concentrated on one area of the economy, that would distort economic activity. So it's good economic practice to have our tax revenue come from a wide variety of sources. Indeed, a major part of the economic crash can be blamed on the fact that the government finances became over-dependent on taxation from one area, the building sector. So this whole claim about double taxation really makes no sense. And of course, nothing of value can truly be free. Like the food in the hotel, we do of course pay for our water, just not at the point of use, and not proportional to our use. This has two bad effects. Firstly, like me pigging out in the hotel, there's no incentive to use water wisely. Remember, unpriced resources get wasted. People from the Right to Water campaign, when they're faced with this point, they tend to puff out their chests and say how insulting it is to accuse decent Irish working people of wasting a valuable resource. There's two problems with that. The first is that it's obvious that there are huge variations in water use, and it's clear that the richer you are, the more water you use. The Irish Times reported that richer areas of Dublin, such as Dublin 6, use an average of 488 litres per person per day, while the working class people in Dublin 20 use an average of 290 litres per day. But both of those are huge areas, so the measurement isn't very fine-grained. Daily usage in Dublin 6 averages at 488 litres, so half the people use more than that, and for certain some of them use much more. And 290 is the average use in Dublin 20, so half of the people there are using less than that, and for sure some of them are using much less. How can I be sure? Because the average person in the UK, where water use is universally metered, is 150 litres per day, barely half the amount the average person uses in the lowest use area of Dublin, and the average use in the UK is less than 1/3 of the average use in Dublin 6. So it's clear that the people in the UK respond to incentives, and many people in Ireland respond to a lack of an incentive. When water is short, no doubt some people do the public-spirited thing and voluntarily cut back their use. Some people turn off the tap when they're brushing their teeth. Some people don't run the tap before they get a glass of water. Some people don't run the dishwasher unless it's full. And some people go to Lidl and buy plastic swimming pools that take more water to fill in one day than other families use in months. It's not fair that the thrifty should have to pay for the profligacy of others, especially when the profligate are, in general, richer than the thrifty. Right to Water's claim that water charges are anti-progressive is not only not correct, it's the exact reverse of the truth. And, as I said, there's a second reason why making water free is a bad idea. Not only do the customers not value it, the supplier isn't too careful with it either. We lose half of our water supply, half of it, through leaks. Irish Water inherited their system from the local authorities, and they're only slowly, very, very slowly, getting around to fixing any of them. And why should they? It makes no difference to them if the water gets to their customers or not. If that was electricity or any other commodity that's priced in the market, then I suspect that they would display far more urgency. It's not only the customers that react to financial incentives, the suppliers do as well. And it's not just leaks. Luke Ming Flanagan famously presented the then Taoiseach with a stinking brown liquid that came from the taps of some of his constituents. If any other company didn't supply an acceptable product, you could at the very least refuse to pay the bill. But when the bill is just stuck onto general taxation, the supplier has very little reason to get concerned. The financial transaction between a customer and a supplier fundamentally changes the power relationship. Remember that saying that if you aren't paying for the product, you are the product? That doesn't just apply on the internet. But it's true that water is a very basic commodity. People who say that you can't treat people's water supply like baked beans or lawnmower widgets are right. There's no prospect of any competition in the water supply, and cutting off the water of someone who can't afford the bill would be a devastating and disproportionate punishment to people who are already likely to be not very well off. But that doesn't mean we should give a free, unlimited supply of pure drinking water to everyone in the country to drink and wash with, to wash their cars with, to water their lawns with, and to fill their Lidl swimming pools with. We can't, and even if we could, we shouldn't. A supply of food is just as important as a supply of water, but nobody argues that food should be given away for free to all. It's not beyond the capability of our republic to have an effective, fair water metering and billing system. Effective means that it funds the upkeep and repair of the water system and disciplines both user and supplier to prevent waste and maintain a good supply. Fair means that people pay proportional to their use and that nobody is faced with a risk of their water supply being cut off. It shouldn't be difficult to figure out an allowance for the basic needs of a household, enough for drinking, cleaning and washing. Set that as a basic allowance to be paid for out of general taxation, and allow users who want to use more, to water their lawns, to wash their cars or to fill their plastic Lidl swimming pools, let them do it and let them pay for it. There's plenty of water in the system, and that funding can go towards fixing the pipes so that the water actually reaches the consumers.
Never miss a show. Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
Also, Right to Water make a good point that a water billing system could well be a preparation for privatising the system, as per the model in England and Wales. That has had very poor outcomes in the UK, and there's no reason to think that it would do any better here. And then there's the basic point that water in our rivers or in our water tables under our feet is an extraordinary thing to sell off to a company that can be taken over and run as a monopoly for the profit of shareholders in Wall Street or Shanghai. That doesn't mean there can be no private sector involvement, though. I don't see any reason why a private company couldn't bid to service the system. The KPIs, the measurement of how well they're doing, is pretty easy to measure. How quickly repairs are done, how much water leaks from the system, and the quality of the water itself. Private sector management is generally more efficient, and there's no need to sell off the assets to benefit from that. I'm not totally convinced of the idea of a constitutional amendment to prevent privatising the system, but whatever needs to be done to prevent that happening is certainly a good idea.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On the line now, I have John Leahy. He is the leader of Renua Ireland. John, you became leader after Renua didn't have a very strong result in the last election. What are you looking forward to in the next election?
Yeah, well, firstly, we're delighted to be back on the pitch. As you clearly stated there, we had a very poor showing. We got none of our TDs elected. The only positive thing was that we got 2% of the vote. Mm-hmm. So over 50,000 people, or approximately 50,000 people, came out and supported Renua in terms of our policies. And that allowed us to have state funding. And in that state funding, we've used over the last 2 years, approximately, there, trying to develop policy. I became the leader of Renua at that stage. After doing a root and branch review, we went around the whole country and we met the membership. As you can imagine, the membership were very deflated at that stage. You know, we had a high-profile leader in Lucinda Creighton. Mm-hmm. She failed to get elected, and I suppose people felt, well, what direction was the party going to go in, and was there still life in Renua after Lucinda? I suppose we have proven over the last 2 years that there is life. We've readjusted our policies, and we're driving forward, and we're building a nice platform in terms of running candidates in the next general election.
Okay, you say that you've revisited a lot of your policies. In the last election, you were pursuing what was called a flat tax. I see now on your website your policies include a progressive taxation system, which is really a direct reversal of the flat tax. Why has your views changed on that?
Well, the views in terms of us looking at and trying to alter the tax system, which is a very complicated tax system. I think there's over 40 components it's got to do with the Irish tax system. Mm-hmm. Flat tax to me and looking at tax is all about rewarding work. And even though the concept of flat tax at 23% we were looking at various models that was across the world. And even though they have been implemented in many countries, Estonia was one of them. And we felt that given 23%, taxing people at 23% and giving 77% of your income back to the person that's working would allow for a lot more discretionary money in their pay packet at the end of the week. We felt that extra money going into a house would help maybe finance education.
I spoke to your colleague Milo Power, in the run up to that election, and it was clear, and she accepted that for people on very, very high earners, that would mean tens and possibly hundreds of thousands of euro per year of a tax cut, and that would have to be funded.
Yeah, and if you look at it there, and this is where we struggled in terms of the communication of the message that we're trying to get across with flat tax. Flat tax, people totally did the scenario of the millionaire. And they're saying you're going to give 77% of the income back to the millionaire, so it doesn't need it. Mm-hmm. But research has shown that the majority of millionaires don't actually pay their taxes in Ireland. They're millionaires and they have tax consultants that have offshore accounts and whatnot. And they don't actually pay the tax here because the tax rate is too high. But we have come away from that model, and we have accepted in Renua that our communication in terms of the way we went about the flat tax didn't resonate with the general public. But we did feel that we were onto something, and we were very strong, and it's one of our pillars in terms of taxpayers first. And we did revisit the model, and we revisited it under the guidance of Jim Power, the economist. Mm-hmm. And we brought him on board as a consultant to look at changing the tax bands. Now, thankfully, Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, and Pascal O'Donoghue, the Minister of Finance, has looked at this in the last 2 years and actually has changed the tax bands. We have a situation in this country that, if you some income earners that if they earn over 33,800, they're on 50% tax. And we have found
no, they're not on 50% tax. They're on 50% tax for their marginal income. For the next euro that they earn, but not of their entire income.
That's right. But we felt that this was disencouraging people from actually taking on employment in some cases. We're looking at a situation whereby overtime, some people that would do overtime would actually be in a negative position rather than a positive position after doing overtime. So it was constantly hampering people. And thankfully, the current government is looking at it. And they're talking about moving the tax bands again in the 2019 budget. Now, I know it's been.
You're talking a little bit, John. You're talking a little bit more like a lobby group than a political party there. And I'm looking at a lot of the policies that you put on your website very helpfully. It doesn't seem like of the radical things that were in Renua, people may have liked them or not, but in the last election you certainly did have some radical policies such as the flat tax. Have you just kind of watered them down so that you're just a mini version of Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael?
No, well, if you take it at the moment, we've started the agenda in terms of taxation. No other political party was talking about taxation until we came with the flat tax and actually talking about rewarding work. And if you look at our slogan for the last election, it clearly stated on all the posters for Renua and all the candidates was rewarding work. And we've started that conversation. Now, thankfully, that has been carried on. If we were in government in the morning, that'd be one of our pillars, one of our 6 pillars. And if you talk about being radical, if you take the other situation where we were looking at the 3-strike rule, now people laughed upon us at the 3-strike rule at the time. But
this is a criminal policy. You're saying that people who commit 3 crimes, exactly what sort of crimes are we talking about there?
We're talking about hardened criminals. And again, this was a message that was played around with in the media, and we weren't allowed to communicate it. Now, we have ourselves to blame. I'm not blaming people that maybe have strength in the media. At the end of the day, we have to take full responsibility. But if you look at it where our position is in terms of law and order, we are the only political party that wants to be tough on crime. We in terms of the 3-strike rule, at the time, we were looking at situations where you had elderly people that was being tied up in their homes and left for dead. I had a situation in my own constituency, a high-profile case, whereby you had an elderly man, a farmer, a bachelor, who was tied up and left for dead in a place called Coolderry in County Offaly. It was on a high-profile case.
John, that 3 strikes policy, I think it was intended to get across a feeling of being tough on crime, but it seemed to hark to policies that are in the United States that in some cases have been incredibly unjust. For example, people getting 25-year or lifetime prison sentences for having a very small amount of drugs for personal use. Whatever your policy was, do you think that it was perhaps intended to give the impression of throwing red meat to the most reactionary elements in society? That hasn't gone down well in the US, has it?
No, that hasn't gone down too well in the US, but what hasn't gone too well in Ireland is in the fact that the amount of rural crime that we've seen, the amount of elderly people that has been beaten up and tied and left for dead, and then just reports then come back in, and you have criminals that are looking at the opportunity of happening again. They're on bail, they're repeat offenders. We have a situation in this country where we have hardened criminals that are maybe at this point in time 16, 17 plus convictions, not serving time in jail, getting back out and just using the opportunity to do what they need to do. We have a situation where we have gangland criminals in this country.
Exactly what can be done about that?
Well, what we would see is we see tougher on crime. The problem is if you're a criminal at the moment in Ireland, you look at the opportunity and you look at the risk, and the risk does not measure up in terms of the consequences that needs to be for a criminal. If you go out and you create a hardened crime in terms of aggravated burglary, you ransack someone's place, you come in, fair enough, let it be the case first time around, you get bail, but if you're a repeat offender and you go out and you commit an aggravated burglary or you interfere with people's lives again, Renua will not be unapologetic on this. We will make sure, and we want a situation where they will do time and do hard time and do long time, and they won't be in a situation whereby that they're getting back out after a couple of months, or in many cases that you've seen in Ireland whereby the Gardaí would escort the criminal to the prison, and next thing there's no room, and next thing they're back out on the road straight away. Like, Renua want to be in a situation where we need to build a prison.
John, one thing on that, and first of all, I agree with you, and I think a large proportion of people will agree with you in particularly, and one good idea that I've seen on your website that I think certainly endorse would be to remove judges' discretion to impose concurrent sentences, whereby you get 2 for the price of 1, or sometimes 22 or 102 for the price of 1. You commit a large number of crimes and you only serve 1 sentence. But we have serious problems with Garda corruption. We have incredible stories coming out. We have the Garda Commissioner himself personally benefiting from corruptly cancelling penalty points. It's not feasible, is it, to give the Gardaí ever more power? And the one thing I want to just read directly from your website here, it says, introduce 90-day detention orders for those whom Gardaí suspect of being actively involved in preparations to murder or some other crimes as well. If that had been available, what do you think would have happened to Maurice McCabe?
Yeah, well, I think Maurice McCabe, in fairness, didn't go out and actually kill anybody. But we're talking about hardened criminals here.
No, but you're saying that people should be sent to jail where the Gardaí suspect that they're going to commit a crime. You don't think that some senior Gardaí would have very conveniently suspected that Maurice McCabe was going to commit a crime?
I think they're totally different things. I think Maurice McCabe...
No, but they're not totally different things. You have a police force in Ireland that has been entirely unaccountable and that has too much power centralised in one organisation, and that power has been grossly abused. You're proposing to give them more power.
Well, you look at it, for example, if anyone is going... The Gardaí don't sentence criminals. That's up to the judge.
But you're proposing that they should be able to.
No, In terms
it's
of
on your
attention,
website.
what we're talking about there is the amount of money that's spent in this country trying to keep criminals from killing criminals is just chronic. There is not a thing about the victim here. If there's a criminal out there at this point in time under Renua leadership and under Renua policy, if they commit criminal damage or interfere with people's lives or murder somebody, they should go away for a long, long time. We're saying 30 years. We're saying they should be only parole after 22 years. At this point in time, we have too many families that are suffering from the loss of a family member, and then have to have a campaign 7 years later where somebody's getting out on parole.
But John, doesn't that equally speak to the failure of the Gardaí, that in a huge proportion of crimes, nobody is convicted at all? And that also is down to bad management and sometimes worse within the Gardaí.
Well, regardless, let it be the Gardaí, let it be judges, let it be prison service. Our policy is very, very clear. Hardened criminals need to do hard time.
Sure, nobody argues with that. Nobody argues with that. But on your website, 90 days that the Gardaí can detain somebody, can give somebody 90 days detention because they suspect they may be about to commit a crime. That's plainly unconstitutional, isn't it?
I wouldn't think so. And we're talking about here, gangland is what we're talking about here.
No, we're not, because this doesn't involve any court decision. It's just what the Gardaí suspect. And we've found out, for example, with completely false allegations of sexual abuse made against Maurice McCabe, Gardaí can suspect things that are mighty convenient for them to suspect.
Well, if you take, for example, you're using the Maurice McCabe argument here. You look at what's actually happening as well. How much resources and time is actually spent in terms of monitoring these gangland criminals that are out there at the moment? You have a situation whereby absolutely consistently, you have Gardaí trying to stop hardened criminals from killing each other. Yet they're brought in, they're let out after 24 hours, knowing that their life is in danger. They're actually endangering people, the general public. We're only a shooting away from some victim, from someone coming down the street in a gangland situation, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they're being killed. The Gardaí are letting people back out that are involved in gangland because they can't detain them long enough to actually keep them safe, firstly, but actually to have a situation where they can investigate and do a proper interrogation on it.
Can I read from your own website, John? Can I read from your own website?
Yes,
Renua will defend our constitution and uphold our sovereignty. John, isn't defending our constitution, isn't an integral part of that controls on the power of the state, particularly on the power of the Gardaí, particularly when the Gardaí have been shown to be so corrupt in recent years?
There's no question that reform is needed in the Gardaí, but reform in the Gardaí, it'll only happen if policies is right, and we need to get policies such as Renua's, and no other political party is saying this.
I don't see anything on reforming the Gardaí.
No, I'm saying we all accept that there's elements of the Gardaí that need to be reformed. There's no question about that. But reforming the Gardaí and not having the proper policies in place is not going to work. Blaming the Gardaí for everything is not the solution. Blaming the judges is not the solution. They're working within the policy that's laid down by government, and we believe that the policies laid down by government is not strong enough to deal with the hardened criminal. And the opportunities that's out there for the criminal and the risk, there is no consequences to it. And that's why we're seeing a rampant increase in hardened criminals more or less taking over this countryside. We've seen them coming through to rural Ireland, driving through the motorways, ransacking anything in front of them, and being caught and having just gone in front of a judge, and a judge in Kerry making one decision, and the same situation, maybe a similar situation up in Offaly or in Cork, and they're getting away scot-free. There's no consistency in terms of the penalties that are put down them. And our stance is very, very simple in Renua, and we're the only political party that's saying it. We want to be hard on criminals, and we want to put them away for a long time. If they interfere with the general public in any shape or form, and there's victims on the back of it, we want to make sure they do a hard time.
I think you've communicated that very clearly. To move on to one other issue, you say that Renua will campaign for the return of national visas over all policy areas and the abandonment of qualified majority voting within the EU. Specifically, Renua are opposed to the common EU foreign policy and will work to ensure Irish fishermen are given greater rights to fish their territorial waters. Irish fishermen don't have anything restricting them from fishing their own territorial waters. The size of the industry is perhaps small. But one thing on that, if every country, all 28 or 27 when the UK leaves in the EU, has a veto on everything, that means nothing can ever get done, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, firstly, Ireland needs the EU. We're a small open economy. We need to have trading partners. What we're looking at is a situation, especially in the fishery side of it, we have been approached by lobby groups that have stated clearly, that there's too much restrictions there. And
too much restrictions on what exactly?
Well, in terms of fishing rights, it has been a major issue. It has come up with a Waterford candidate, so it has, and he's brought this before. I wouldn't have.
Well, this is a restriction on overfishing you're talking about, or what?
Yeah, the restrictions in general. Now, I wouldn't be massively au fait with the fishing industry. There's no point saying. I think there's areas that I deal with, and there's areas where other people deal with. But in terms of the EU is needed. It was an issue that was...
Oh, but hold on a second then. Hold on a second, because what it seems to me from this here, and also you say, we do not believe that free movement of people is an essential element of any customs union. You're essentially saying that you would want Ireland to withdraw from the free movement aspects of the EU.
Yeah, well, if you take it the free movement of people at the moment, like we're bringing people into this country, the direct provision hasn't worked. The first thing
hold on for a second. No, you're confusing two completely different things. There's freedom of movement for EU citizens within the EU. Direct provision has nothing got to do with that. No. Are you saying, and you say we believe that free movement of people is essential, and we do not believe that free movement of people is an essential element of any customs union. You're saying that you want Ireland not to participate in the free movement of people that is essentially an essential part of the EU.
Yeah, free movement. That's a policy that we're working on at the moment, and my apologies there, I mixed it up with immigration, because we have a policy on immigration. But the free movement of people in terms of the EU, I don't know what page you're reading our policy off at the moment, but are you sure it's not the immigration page that we're talking about here?
I'm pretty sure that it says, I'll give you the exact text, we want to work to introduce an Australian-type point system for inter-EU migration. We do not believe that the free movement of people is an essential element of any customs union. You're saying not being part of the free movement of people within the EU, which essentially, as the UK is finding out, means not being part of the EU.
Yeah, and I suppose in fairness, we are learning a lot in terms of Brexit and the policies are going forward there. So from that point of view, listen, what it states, and there's very little, in terms of where Renua stands on it, we are sceptical in terms of EU involvement, in terms of their over-involvement in this country, their over-regulations, and it's something that we're trying to stem. Well, if you take at the moment, and you take them taken at a local level, the local authorities, and I find it as a county councillor, there's constantly EU direction coming down at local level, never mind at national level, in terms of how funding is to spend, how we operate our councils.
Give me a couple of hard examples.
Yeah, but for example, like you see our road network, the money comes down from the road network in terms of from the TII, and basically
what's the TII?
Yeah, the TII is the Transfer Infrastructure Ireland, and we was constantly that we're being told that certain projects have to be allocated. This is EU funding, and it comes down and we don't have control on it, even though we might have roads that are completely derelict. Decimated from potholes and whatnot, and constantly every time that you see central government want to pass something, there's always the EU stamp to it.
No, hold on for a second. No, constantly is a very big word. Give me a hard example of an over-regulation where you think Ireland should be allowed to do something that we're not allowed to do because of an EU regulation.
Well, I'll give you the typical example in terms of how local government can spend their funds. There's very little discretionary money on it. Everything is in terms of how they operate on a day-to-day basis. You look at the environmental section, you look at the road section. It's constantly when you're being this secular comes down from the council. You see planning, for example, is a big one. You take rural Ireland, for example. Their stipulation comes down to say one-off houses, it's not permitted because of environmental grounds.
Has nothing to do with the EU. That's planning law.
Well, but it's planning law, but it's coming down from the EU.
No, it's not.
You take agriculture, for example.
Agriculture has a lot of controls coming from the EU, but planning laws certainly don't.
Well, if you take planning law, for example, when I go and I put a motion to Offaly County Council that we would look at doing away with local needs, that we would go away with in terms of one-off houses, we'd look at maybe building up rural areas.
When that motion was passed
by the council, and that was sent up to the minister, the minister's response saying is that we're working off EU guidelines in terms of certain planning laws and development plans. And we're currently going through a county development plan process in the next couple of months, and 50% of it. Increasingly, I've seen over the last 10 years.
That has nothing got to do with the EU.
Well, from where I'm sitting as a county councillor, it's the stick that's constantly beating us at local level. When we want to make serious change, the minister will throw it off to all the EU regulations.
That can happen, and certainly people can blame the EU when they feel like it. But I'm still not getting any specific thing that an Irish person can't do because of an EU regulation that you think they should be able to do.
Well, I've given you the example in terms of planning. When you look at it from a county council...
But planning isn't controlled by the EU.
Well, it's not controlled by the council, because...
Planning typically comes from planning laws and planning acts and on board Planola, which is under the Department of the Environment.
Yeah, and the restrictions from the EU in terms of building one-off houses, restrictions in terms
Nothing got to do with that. That's under planning law. It's Irish planning law.
Well, I tell you, if that was the case, then the minister must be misinforming the council when I passed them a motion. Because
and in any case, what you're saying is that you want to be building one-off housing. Are you possibly trying to recruit some of the Healy Rays as members with that policy?
Well, no, that's been on the ground. If you look at rural Ireland, you even take the fabric of rural Ireland. You take, and anyone can relate to this example. You take a GAA club, for example, hurling or Gaelic football. I see in my county whereby there is 6 senior hurling teams now have to join with another 6 opposition teams to actually provide underage teams. So effectively what you're looking at is there's amalgamations of teams because the population is not there anymore. And that's down to basically and utterly planning laws, so we're restricting people building in their area. And that's
let's look at that. That's actually a good one to look at, because one of the things that you're promoting on your website, in your policies, in your 6 pillars as you call them, is balanced rural and regional development through work hubs. Now, we had, going back about 10 years, the National Spatial Policy, and that was completely trashed by Charlie McCreevy with his so-called decentralisation plan. The bottom line is that if you want young working people to move into an area, there has to be a critical mass of other young people working there, of restaurants and bars and something. It has to be an interesting place for people to work. The Facebooks and the Twitters and the PayPals and all of those won't move to small towns because they can't attract a workforce to work there. And it was proposed under the National Spatial Strategy that there would be about 6 hubs would be developed in order to counterbalance Dublin. And what happened then was every backbench TD and local councillor said, we don't want that place over there to get something unless we get it as well. And it meant that the resources, instead of being concentrated in a few places that could compete with Dublin, they were smeared like margarine across the whole country, which meant that nowhere could compete with Dublin, and we continue with the unbalanced development.
That's right.
Yeah, isn't it really the sort of Gombianism that saying that we want to be allowed to, as you say, build the once-off houses and have everything everywhere? You can't have all development everywhere. We have to have some sort of centres, otherwise we will end up with only one centre.
Well, if you look at the National Spatial Strategy, and I will 100% concur with everything you've said, if you wanted to find out who the minister was back 2000 and 2003, all you do is look at the Spatial Strategy, because that'll indicate to you if you look where the towns that were looked at, 22, 23 towns, I think at the time, anyone that was in the cabinet ministry at that stage, their town was mentioned. The same thing actually nearly happened this time around.
Yeah, and that's what's going to happen, John. There's going to be political manoeuvring in order to get our space, to get our place put on the list and not for development and not the other place. But the bottom line is that this type of Gombian politics basically sunk that policy.
Agree totally. Now, what we've done is we've invested time, effort and resources into putting a submission together.
But John, isn't promoting one-off housing that exact type of Gombianism?
Can I develop it and I'll come back and we'll finish on the one-off housing.
Okay.
In Renua, what we done was we went very early in the play for this strategy 2040. We hired a consultant, we done our homework on it, and we actually would propose that we would go with 5-6 hubs outside of Dublin. 100% I see it on the ground. We have people in my constituency and other constituencies that are travelling at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, beat the traffic, sleeping in their cars till maybe 8 o'clock and going into work. That's just to avoid traffic. That's not sustainable. There's no work-life balance in that whatsoever. We've seen it on a voluntary capacity on the ground where people, like good people, can't give their time because they're leaving, they're not getting home at 5 or 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, they're going to bed at 9 o'clock, they're getting back up. That needs to change. So I think the strategy going forward in terms of developing Galway, Cork, Waterford, all these cities that are there at the moment, developing them and putting the money in is an excellent thing, and we're all for it. Where I'm talking about one-off houses is, I don't believe that my constituency, and my constituency wasn't selected as a hub. Athlone was, which is beside us. Yeah. But I do see that there is massive potential, and I do have young people coming to me that would love to be working in the likes of Athlone, that's 20-25 minutes away, a half an hour away, whatever the case may be, rather than going to Dublin.
But John, when you're campaigning for one-off housing, aren't you condemning those people to a lifetime of car dependency?
No. You have a situation whereby in rural Ireland it's a different makeup than urban Ireland. You have a situation where
that's what we need to change, John, because what's happening is that's what you need to change, because essentially large rural areas have to forego that development in order to centralise that development in places like Cork, Waterford, Athlone or whatever, and that would create a critical mass that those regional towns and cities will be able to compete with Dublin for the larger employers. When every little boreen and every village wants to get developed, be it with one-off houses or whatever, that means none of them can compete with Dublin, and only Dublin gets the development in the end.
I disagree with that. If you have your hubs are going to be a central base that attracts jobs. If you have them hubs, naturally enough, you're still going to need people. All people can't live in them hubs. We're going to create the same thing that you created with Dublin. You'd have everyone living in them 5 or 6 hubs, and you'd have nobody living in rural Ireland. That's not sustainable. Where I'm talking about is, we have a situation, and not about 25%, maybe 30% of my constituents could actually afford to build their own house, not a burden on the state, and build it on the family land. That's where we're getting caught in this corner, and that's what I'm talking about one-off housing.
John, that is a disaster from an environmental point of view. That is a disaster from a transport point of view. That's a disaster from a social point of view. That means that everybody who lives in those one-off houses, if they want to buy a litre of milk, if their kid wants to visit the other kid in their class, every single time they have to get in a car and drive, and that's a disaster.
That's rural Ireland, and we can't take that away from people. And it's everyone's right to actually live in where they were born. Sure, like on what you're stating then is that we'll close every primary school that's in a small village.
No, but the development should be focused on a short list of places.
The only way something develops is the fact that you have footfall. You can't have footfall if you have people living in the urban cities. That's not possible. I totally reject that, and that goes back to my point in terms of EU involvement. The EU were telling us that we cannot build one-off houses because of the environment. We have state-of-the-art septic tanks now, filtration systems. When we came with that technology, they're still restricting it. We cannot have a situation. I totally and utterly disagree.
John, let me just give you a concrete example. If you've got, say, somebody living who might build a one-off house in your constituency, or who might live 20 or 30 kilometres away, for example, in Athlone. If those people live in one-off houses scattered around your constituency, the bottom line is that takes away the critical mass of population from Athlone, so it can't develop and get even mid-sized, let alone large employers, can't even get mid-sized employers in competition with Dublin. And in addition, that means that every time that family wants to get a litre of milk, every time the child wants to go and play with the other child in their class, anything like that, they have to get in their car.
Well, I totally disagree with that. I'm from rural Ireland, and it doesn't work that way. And if we had to follow the policy that you're saying, in terms of that we'd overheat every hub that's going to be there, housing, rent.
But the alternative, John, is just to overheat Dublin.
No,
because it fails. You can't develop every point. I don't want to continue on that because I know that you're in local authorities, and I want to go back to another policy on your website. It says reform local authorities to ensure value for money for taxpayers. Never heard anybody disagree with that. Never heard anybody agree to what that might mean. You also say we will work to identify powers and responsibilities that can be transferred from national to local government. John, of the powers that local government has at the moment, can you name for me a couple of things that they're doing excellently?
Local authorities. Firstly, I have to say, from being in a rural constituency, that the engineers on the ground work extremely well. The people
we can all say that, and we can say they're all grand people, and they're best, and they walk uphill to and from work. But I want to know what responsibility that, when we can say your local authority, what responsibility does it have that it does excellently?
Well, there's a lot of responsibilities taken from them, and I'll cover that in the second part of it. But if you take from a local authority point of view, we have over 2,000 tenants in the housing. The maintenance of them houses, the upkeep of them and the antisocial behaviour and all that is kept very good intact. They have an excellent record. They have excellent staff there. They have an excellent staff in terms of the...
So local authority housing, you're saying. Okay, next.
Yeah, the environmental side in Offaly County Council, in fairness to them, they're very, very good in terms of the litter wardens working with community groups in terms of tidy towns. That's an excellent initiative. There's a lot of great work going on in the villages and towns in terms of the village renewal schemes. We had 4 towns last year, 8 towns being done up this year. That means a total transformation of the towns in terms of footpaths and the way the town operates and traffic management.
Okay, so that I think that's, you may well be right on what you're saying, but it seems to me terribly small beer. And if I can just go through a couple of things that the local authorities
and the power's been taken away from them.
Well, can I go through a couple of things? Well, let's have a look at the powers that have been taken away from them. Yeah. One of the powers that was taken away from local authorities was taxi regulation. Taxi regulation was a catastrophe, literally a catastrophe, before it was taken away from local authorities. One power that they still have is maintaining the electoral register. The last time that I can get any quality data on it is about 10 years ago. It's striking that they don't publish it anymore. 1 entry in 3 on our electoral register, the most crucial thing in our democracy, one entry in 3 was an error. Yes. Another thing that they're responsible for is driver licensing. This is a catastrophe. Nobody, and also the penalty points. We have no idea who has what driver's license. It is a disorganized mess. We have no centralized system of taking away licenses from people whose license has been suspended. There is nothing almost that local authorities can say that they do consistently well. And it's not a good management strategy to identify the weakest area of government, local authorities, and say, let's give them more powers.
Oh yeah, but if you're a county councillor like myself, and you look at a situation where, in my 10 years, provisions for councils to build houses taken from them, and we see where that's got us at this point in time. We're in a housing crisis, and the department won't let release funds or won't let release resources.
That's true, and I'd agree with you on that the Department of the Environment isn't giving the council. No, hold on for 1 second. Isn't giving the councils money to build new houses. You couldn't really say, though, John, that the quality of local authority housing throughout the country is very impressive.
I tell you, you need to visit the standard that the council are building to. You want to visit.
You know what I'd do, John, is I'd visit an estate agent, and if the house that you're buying is either in or close to a local authority estate, that diminishes the value.
The regulations on a new build council house is no different than the regulations.
That's true. That's what's being built now, if it was being built, but there's almost none being built. So we have great regulations for the houses that aren't being built. But John, local authority housing is a byword for bad housing, isn't it?
I disagree with that. The regulations are there.
It can be really proven because in the pricing,
an engineer won't sign off on it unless it's right. And thankfully we're living in that age. If there's new builds happening, if there's houses being purchased, I know that there's houses being purchased from ghost estates that have been newly done up, and the spec is higher than what you'd be spec that you would buy for a private if you were buying it privately yourself. The spec is unbelievable, and I disagree with that totally.
Let's park housing in that case. And would you agree that jobs that are entirely delegated to the local authorities, such as the driver licensing, such as running the electoral register, they're a catastrophe, aren't they?
To run the electoral register is one of the tasks of the local authorities. And
it's done very, very, very badly.
Yeah, but if you take, for example, and this is what I'm saying about giving powers back, there was a 23% cut in finance to the local authorities when we hit a crash. There was a 27% decrease in terms of staffing, and they're only starting to be replenished now. So you have a situation. That's why we've put it in there. If you want people motivated on the ground, you have to have a good local authority. You have to have good services on the ground. And that's where we put it in there, because that's what people require. But I've seen in my own council that 23% in terms of funding cut, never replaced, and 27% in terms of staff, and never.
But hold on, John. That doesn't address for decades. The electoral register has been a disaster.
You have a situation whereby
John, address the point. For decades, the electoral register has been a disaster.
I agree,
and that's entirely the responsibility of the local authorities.
I agree.
John, you ran, obviously you weren't successful, but you got about 4,500 votes in the last election.
Yes.
What would success for Renua look like in the coming election?
Well, we hope that we will run 20 candidates in the 39 constituencies. That's where we're at the moment. If we had longer, we'd hopefully have a lot more. Mm-hmm. We believe there's going to be an election in September. If not September, I do believe it's going to be after the budget in November. We are at a point now where we've about 20 candidates that we're going to run. A success for Renua would be to get 2+% of the vote, which would allow us state funding as a registered political party. And also we would be hoping that we would hopefully get somewhere around 4 TDs elected.
Okay, so 3 or 4 TDs would be a successful outcome for Renua.
Would be successful.
I know, John, and people might be prick up their ears a little bit, where you mentioned the number of TDs second and getting state funding first. So what happened to Renua was they got no TDs in the last election, but they did just scrape over the 2% mark, which got them quite a few €100,000 of state funding, which, if I was a cynic, I might suspect that was why the party was kept going. But you said success in any case would be 3 or 4 TDs. What would be complete failure?
Well, complete failure would be the opposite to that. We get the 2% would fail on the 2% and fail on getting TDs elected. I think the most important thing for Renua is to get TDs elected. Mm-hmm. That comes before the state funding. If you look at the Social Democrats, they got 2.8%. We got 2.3%. The Social Dems returned the 3 independents that they already had and elected nobody new. So people,
they came very close.
So if you want to make comparisons, we had 3. They were independents. They held their independent status. The Social Dems, and they got the 3 across the line, and only got a couple of points ahead of ourselves. The Greens was only got 3% and got 2 elected. So, and we were actually very, very short. I was 150 votes from being elected. Lucinda was 300 votes, 400 votes from being elected, and Billy Timmins was 500 votes.
The figures went against you. There's no question about that. But give me a specific point beyond which Renua would say we're going to fold our tents. If you got no TDs elected in the next election, would you say, okay, we gave it a couple of good goes, we're going to do a PD on this, we're going to wind up the party?
I wouldn't like to see that. I had a very easy option. I was an independent before. I was involved in no political party. I was an independent. Came very close in 2011 being elected as an independent. My vote had dropped back in 2016. Maybe the renewal element, and
it didn't do you any good, did it?
It didn't help. But I would like to think that what we've done is we've weathered the storm. We've showed people that we're brave. The easiest thing in the world was for me, and I sacrificed. I gave up my job. I went full time with Renua. We're trying to develop a political party, which is not simple. It's hard to get people engaged in politics because people don't believe in it.
Is it possible, John, that you're just in a very competitive market? There's an awful lot of right-wing parties with localism, Gumbian politics, that we can build your house wherever you want, and we'll complain about Europe a bit, but we won't really do very much about it. There's a lot of people offering that.
Well, I think that's a very unfair comment, and I don't believe that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael or Sinn Féin or Labour or Green are rolling out the same message as us. You pick up the newspapers or telling me where Micheál Martin or the Taoiseach of the country is talking about tough on crime, where we're the only pro-life party in the country. We're the only ones actually constantly advocating for taxpayer first. We're setting the agenda. A lot of our policies and elements of our policies are in the programme for government. I'm saying that's something that we can take credit for.
Okay, I understand that, but let me nail you down on failure. If you get less votes or a lower percentage of the vote in the coming election than you did in the last, will you wind up?
I don't talk negatively. I'm a very positive person. I can't think like that as a leader of a political party. I'll deal with that when the time comes. But from a Renua perspective, we're out, we're fighting, we're there. We've gone against, everyone's predictions that we would be wound up after 6 months. We refuse to do that. We're back now with 20 candidates ready to run the field. We're back with a manifesto. We're back with a website. We're back with policies. We are starkly different than Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. Anybody can see that. Even the way I'm talking, and you won't hear Micheál Martin or Leo Varadkar or Mary Lou MacDonald talking like the way I'm talking. And we're ready there to contest the next general election. And we will
you've got your state funding with the 2% at least until the next election. John Leahy, leader of Renua Ireland, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you very much. Very enjoyable. Thank you. Thanks a million.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Record a contribution to be included in the next show. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Go to the website for sources and references for everything we were talking about. And while you're there, please like the show on Facebook, follow @Here's How Podcast on Twitter, follow John Leahy @JohnLeahyOY and Renua Ireland @Renua Ireland, and get in touch with me if you can think of a guest or a topic for a future show. Also, you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone or by email. It's all at www.here'show.ie. And just to remind you, there's a link to my Patreon account there, so if you'd like to support the podcast and help make it more frequent with more research, I'd really appreciate that. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.